Happiness is something almost everyone seeks, yet very few truly understand. We hear so much about happiness, we dream of it, we chase it our whole lives. But when asked what happiness is, most of us become confused. Some define happiness as success, some tie it to money. Some believe happiness lies in an ideal relationship, a complete family, or a stable future. But there are also those who, after too many struggles and losses, sigh and say that happiness does not exist in this world. Perhaps it is not that happiness is not real, but that we have been looking for it in places where it cannot be held for long. From a very young age, we become used to thinking that happiness is ahead of us. Happiness will come when we finish school, when we get a good job, when we earn a lot of money, when we are respected by others, when we have a family, when our children succeed. We place happiness at the end of the road we are walking, and we believe that if we just try a little harder, endure a little longer, we will reach it. Yet, strangely, each time we obtain what we once desired, the feeling of joy stays only briefly. Before we can fully enjoy it, we feel lacking again. We want more again. We compare ourselves with others again. And so, happiness arrives and quickly leaves, leaving behind a hard-to-name emptiness. We grow accustomed to living in a state of chasing shadows. Standing on one mountain, we look at another and believe it must be better there. We rarely stop to ask, what in this present moment is nourishing me? Do I have more than I think I do, or do I only stare at what I do not have and then conclude that I am not happy? Meanwhile, many basic conditions for a full life have always been present. A body that still breathes, eyes that can still see, legs that can still walk, a roof that shelters us from rain and sun, a job that allows us to support ourselves, a few loved ones still here to love and to be loved by. If those are not the foundation of happiness, then what is happiness? We often equate happiness with pleasant feelings. When we are joyful, we say we are happy. When we are sad, we think we are unhappy. But emotions change constantly. They come and go, rise and fall, never staying still. If happiness depends only on emotions, then happiness is as fragile as emotions themselves. We rejoice when praised, but feel down when criticized. We are happy when successful, but collapse when we fail. We love life when things go smoothly, but resent it when obstacles appear. A life like this is, in truth, a life led by emotions, and happiness within it cannot last. There are times when we realize we no longer need that feeling of pleasure. When a loved one is in danger, when someone we care about is suffering, when a great purpose needs to be fulfilled, we are willing to accept exhaustion, discomfort, even to sacrifice personal safety. In those moments, we do not call it happiness in the usual sense, yet we feel a deep sense of fulfillment. That is a kind of happiness that comes from satisfying the will, from living in a way that aligns with what we believe is meaningful. This kind of happiness is not loud, not explosive, but it has tremendous power to sustain us. When parents work tirelessly to provide for their children's education, they may not enjoy physical comfort, yet inside they carry a quiet joy. When someone devotes themselves to the community, to a higher ideal, they accept hardship, even pain, yet they do not feel their life is meaningless. This shows happiness is not only the satisfaction of emotions, it is also the fullness of living true to what one believes is right. In this kind of happiness is often more lasting and deeper because it does not depend entirely on external circumstances. Even so, both happiness from emotions and happiness from will still rest on the ego. We still act because I want, I find it meaningful, I need to accomplish it. When the ego is still strongly operating, happiness remains conditional. When the conditions disappear, happiness wavers. Therefore, even though it is deeper, it is still not yet true happiness. True happiness does not come from gaining something more, nor from completely removing suffering. It comes from a state of mind that no longer chases, no longer resists, a state of mind that is content with reality, that accepts what is, without needing everything to match my way before allowing peace. When the mind stops demanding, happiness naturally appears. We often think that only when there is no suffering can there be happiness, but in truth, suffering and happiness are not two separate extremes. They depend on each other to exist. Just as jade is found only within stone, and lotus grows only in mud. Without stone, there is no jade. Without mud, there is no lotus. If we had never been hungry, we would not value food. If we had never been cold, we would not long for warmth. If we had never lost, we would not cherish reunion. Suffering is not the opposite of happiness. It gives happiness meaning. The problem is not that suffering is present, but how we face it. When we resist suffering, resent it, try to eliminate it at all costs, we make it heavier. When we accept that suffering is part of life, an indicator that something needs to be looked at, we begin to learn from it. And when we learn, we grow. Much of our suffering does not come from major events, but from small reactions repeated day after day. A slight inconvenience makes us irritable. A small delay makes us angry. A brief comparison makes us proud and hurt. A lack of recognition makes us sad. These things accumulate over time and create a chronic tension. We live feeling tired all the time, even when no great tragedy has occurred. Not because life is too hard, but because the mind has become too accustomed to demanding. We often think that once a problem is solved, suffering will end. But many times the problem is gone, and yet the suffering remains. Because what makes us suffer is not only the problem, but our habitual way of reacting to problems. If that habit does not change, then even when circumstances change, suffering returns in another form. We change jobs, change relationships, change environments, but if we carry the same mind, suffering follows us. When we begin to view suffering as a signal, we no longer rush to escape. We ask, what am I clinging to? What am I desiring beyond my current capacity? What image am I forcing myself to live up to? What am I afraid of losing? These questions do not make suffering disappear immediately, but they open a door to understanding, and understanding is the foundation of transformation. True happiness is not a state of being joyful all the time. It is the ability to remain present with both joy and sadness without being swept away. It is the ability to smile even when life is not perfect. It is the ability to touch deeply the most ordinary things, a morning in which we can still breathe, a simple meal, a flower blooming by the porch. When the mind is no longer busy with comparison and craving, small things become miraculous. Someone may have little money, no power, no admiration from others, yet still smile, live gently, and touch the present deeply. Wouldn't that be a happy person? Happiness is not about how successful life appears from the outside, but whether the mind has enough peace to receive life. Craving and resistance are very strong energies. Everyone has them. Some people, after major upheavals, find these energies suddenly weaken. But most of us must practice every day, little by little, to transform long-standing habits, not by suppressing them, but by recognizing them. When we clearly see that we are craving, fearing, resisting something, we are no longer completely controlled by it. When the ego becomes smaller, we become less easily hurt. When pride softens, suffering decreases. Much suffering in life is not because we lack something, but because we are touched in our self-image, in our need for recognition, in our desire to be better than others. When we no longer place our worth entirely on those things, life becomes much lighter. Happiness is not something we must search for somewhere far away. It is not contained entirely in the future, nor in ideal conditions. Happiness is already present in the mind, here and now, when we stop running, stop comparing, stop demanding, and begin to live deeply with what we already have. When the heart is calm, life naturally becomes peaceful. When the mind is wide, happiness is no longer rare. Smiling at a flower, doubt breaks apart. Happiness is already here, only because we have foolishly searched for it so long.
When we truly sit down with ourselves, we realize that much suffering does not come from lacking happiness, but from not allowing ourselves to be happy. We become used to setting too many conditions. I will be happy only if this happens, peaceful only if that happens, worthy of smiling after achieving this or that. Meanwhile, life quietly flows through each moment, offering countless chances to feel alive, yet we are not present to receive them. We live more in our heads than in reality. We live with plans, worries, regrets, comparisons, and forget that life can only be touched right now.
We also often mistakenly believe happiness is something that must be maintained continuously. The moment we feel a little joy, we fear it will disappear. That fear of losing makes the joy incomplete. We grip tightly what feels pleasant and unknowingly make it slip away faster. Happiness, strangely, needs an open hand. When we allow things to come and go, without forcing, without clinging, happiness stays longer. There are seasons in life when we do not need happiness in a dazzling sense. There are seasons when simply not collapsing is enough. Just being able to breathe, to eat, to sleep, to keep a bit of clarity, this is already a very deep kind of happiness. But because we are used to comparing ourselves to glittering images outside, we overlook these quiet forms of happiness. We do not realize that the most ordinary times are the foundation that helps us stand when storms arrive. When life is unstable, we think that once it becomes stable, we will be happy. When it is stable, we worry in a different way. It seems that if the mind doesn't change, then no matter how many times circumstances change, the sense of lack remains. We change homes, change jobs, change relationships, change goals, but without changing our view, suffering only changes shape, it does not disappear. One deep root of suffering is the habit of identifying ourselves with our roles. When we do well, we feel valuable. When we do not, we feel useless. When praised, we feel loved. When criticized, we feel denied. But roles are temporary. They come and go with circumstances. If we take them as our essence, then even small changes can shake us. True happiness cannot be built on such a fragile foundation. Mindfulness practice helps us see that thoughts are only thoughts. Emotions are only emotions. They arise and pass away. They are not us. When sadness comes, we know sadness is coming. When anxiety appears, we know anxiety is appearing. We do not need to become sadness. We do not need to become anxiety. Just knowing is enough, and just knowing already reduces suffering greatly. When we no longer treat suffering as an enemy to destroy, but as a phenomenon to understand, we become less tense. We no longer rush to escape, but learn to stay with it gently. This staying is not resignation, it is deep listening. Listening to see what we are forcing ourselves into, what we are chasing, how we are living out of sync with our natural rhythm. Suffering often appears as a reminder. It is time to slow down. It is time to look again at how we are living. But many people, when suffering comes, try to run faster. They find more work to do, more things to consume, more goals to chase, just to avoid facing the emptiness inside. And so, suffering is not heard. It is only pushed back temporarily, then returns stronger. When we dare to stop, dare to stay in discomfort, we begin building a precious capacity, psychological endurance. This capacity does not make us numb, it makes us steady. It helps us not collapse under small frustrations. It keeps us from reacting impulsively with words and actions that cause more harm. And this steadiness creates a very deep kind of happiness, the happiness of not being swept away. We often think we must remove all suffering in order to be happy, but in truth, happiness grows as we learn to live with suffering wisely. When we no longer panic at sadness, no longer fear unrest, no longer hate negative emotions, our inner world gains more space, and when the space is wide, those emotions naturally dissolve faster.
Some suffering lasts a long time simply because we keep retelling its story. We chew again and again on a memory, an injustice, a wound. Each time we retell it, the old emotion is reactivated, as if it just happened. We think we are remembering, but in fact we are hurting ourselves again. When we learn to put the story down, not to forget, but because we no longer need to live inside it, we regain energy for the present. Happiness does not mean having no painful memories, but that those memories no longer control us. They remain as part of the journey, but they are no longer the center. We no longer define ourselves by what happened. We begin to define ourselves by how we are living now. One very important thing is to accept our limitations. We cannot always be strong, always bright, always positive. Human beings have cycles, up and down. When we don't accept this, we blame ourselves during the down phases, and that blame doubles the suffering. But when we allow ourselves to be weak when we need to be weak, to go slowly when we need to go slowly, we don't break. And not breaking is already a great kind of happiness. Sometimes simply surviving is enough. We do not need to shine. We do not need to prove anything. We do not need to achieve something extraordinary. Just continuing to live kindly to ourselves and others means we are on the right path. Happiness is not always radiant. Sometimes it is simply the feeling that we are allowed to breathe out without having to hold everything up. When craving softens, we begin to feel enough. When resistance softens, we begin to feel peace. This enough does not come from having more, but from comparing less. This peace does not come from life being perfect, but from no longer requiring life to be perfect before allowing ourselves to be calm. And then gratitude arises naturally, not forced gratitude, but real gratitude, for seeing that we are still alive, still able to feel, still given the chance to learn. We become grateful for very small things we once took for granted. When gratitude is present, happiness is no longer a luxury. True happiness is not noisy. It does not need to be proven. It does not need to be recognized. It is a state of mind that no longer lacks. When there is no lack, we do not run. When we do not run, we are fully present. And when we are fully present, life becomes miraculous. In the end, we realize happiness is not a destination, but the way we walk. Not a reward at the end of the road, but the quality of each step. When we walk with a peaceful mind, every road contains happiness. When we walk with a restless mind, nowhere feels at ease.
Happiness has always been present in our mind, here, right now. We only need to pause, let go a little, and smile. When we begin to smile at ourselves, not because everything is fine, but because we stop fighting reality, something strange happens. Life seems to soften. Not because circumstances immediately change, but because we no longer waste so much energy resisting. Before, every inconvenience was a battle, every difference was a threat, every disappointment was proof that life was unfair. But when the mind relaxes, we see we do not need to win every battle. Sometimes letting go is the best way to protect ourselves. We often think that if we do not control tightly, everything will collapse. We fear letting go because we fear losing. But the tighter we hold, the more exhausted we become. The more we try to keep things, the more we worry. When we learn to trust that life has its own flow and that we do not need to control everything, part of the burden is set down. We still do what needs to be done, but we no longer live in constant tension, and in that space, happiness can appear. There is a common misunderstanding that happiness must be strong, obvious, something we can clearly feel. But true happiness is often very quiet. It does not need to be named. It is like a stable ground beneath all changes. Whether we are joyful or sad, that ground remains. Whether things are easy or hard, that ground supports us. When we live long enough with this quiet ground, we become less dependent on emotional highs. We do not need excitement to feel alive. Many people think mindfulness means becoming closed off, less emotional. But in truth, mindfulness is living very fully. We still feel sadness, joy, tenderness, but we are not carried away. We feel deeply without drowning. We allow emotions to pass without letting them define who we are. That freedom creates a mature kind of happiness. When we look back, we see that much of our suffering comes from not accepting that life is imperfect. We want everything neat, clear, fair as we understand it. But life does not operate according to personal expectations. Life operates according to causes and conditions. Some things come at the right time, some things come too late, some things never come at all. When we stop demanding that life fulfill our wishes, we no longer live in chronic disappointment. Once we understand that not everything revolves around us, the mind naturally widens. We personalize things less. A harsh word is no longer automatically an insult. A delay is no longer automatically disrespect. A failure is no longer proof that we have no worth. When we stop taking everything personally, we become lighter, and lightness is a very real kind of happiness. We also begin to see others with different eyes. Instead of quickly judging, we sense that behind each unpleasant behavior there may be an unnamed suffering. Behind each burst of anger there may be a soul that is exhausted. When we understand like this, compassion has a place to stand, and when compassion is present, relationships become less abrasive. Living together becomes easier to breathe. Happiness, then, is not only personal, it spreads to those around us. Some people become closed after suffering, but some become deeper. The difference is not in how much they hurt, but in how they meet the pain. Those who use pain to build walls isolate themselves. Those who use pain to expand the heart find connection. When the heart is wide enough, pain is no longer an unbearable burden. We also come to understand that the path of happiness is not always upward. There are phases when we seem to be moving backward. But in truth, those are times when we are learning deeper lessons. Not lessons of success, but lessons of acceptance. Not lessons of victory, but lessons of letting go. These lessons may not make us stand out, but they make us steady. There is something worth reflecting on. The more busily we search for happiness, the more we miss it. We live in the future, thinking happiness is waiting there, but the future never truly arrives. When we reach what we called the future, it has become the present, and we are still not here. Happiness cannot be found where we are absent. When we are truly present, even ordinary things become precious. A simple meal, eaten mindfully, a quiet afternoon with nothing we need to do, a conversation with no need to win. These do not create excitement, but they create fullness, and fullness is the foundation of happiness. Gradually, we stop asking, "How can I be happier?" and start asking, "How can I live more truthfully?" When we live truthfully, we do not need to strain to prove ourselves. We do not need to live according to other people's expectations. We do not need to chase an ideal image. We allow ourselves to be ourselves, with both light and shadow. And in that permission, there is a great relief. Happiness is not a prize for perfect people. It comes to those who dare to live honestly, dare to look back at themselves, dare to let go of unnecessary cravings. It comes when we stop asking, "What am I missing?" and begin to see, "What do I already have?" It comes when we stop forcing life to be different and learn to live in harmony with what is. And then, at some very natural moment, we realize we no longer searching for happiness, not because we have become indifferent, but because we no longer feel lacking. We still live, still work, still face difficulties, yet inside there is a quiet space. That space is not emptiness, it is serenity. Happiness, it turns out, is not something to hold on to, but a state that appears when we stop holding on. Not something to achieve, but something revealed when we stop running away. And when we understand this, we no longer ask where happiness is. We simply smile, because we know it has been here all along. Finally, when we look back on the entire journey of searching for happiness, we see something very simple. What we have been desperately seeking has never left us. Happiness is not located at a far-off destination. It does not wait for us to become skilled enough, rich enough, successful enough before it appears. It is present the moment we stop running, stop comparing, stop demanding life to be different before allowing ourselves peace. Happiness is not a life without suffering. Happiness is the ability to live with suffering without being crushed by it. When sadness comes, we know we are sad. When hardship appears, we do not immediately conclude that our life has failed. When things are not perfect, we can still breathe out softly and carry on. When we understand that suffering is not the opposite of happiness, but the soil from which happiness can grow, we stop being afraid of it. We stop resisting, stop running, and begin to listen. Each suffering then becomes a reminder. Come back, slow down, cling less, be gentler with yourself. And one day we suddenly realize we no longer ask, "When will I be happy?" We still live amid busyness, still have tired moments, still have unfinished things, yet within there is a quiet ground that comes not from life becoming calm, but from the mind becoming less restless. And in a very ordinary moment, we smile at a flower by the roadside with no more doubt in the heart. Happiness is already here, only because for so long we foolishly searched for it endlessly.